My mom threw me out at 16 to raise her new kids. Now that I am rich, she demands I pay for their college. But what happened on my porch made everything changed. I, 28 never thought I'd be writing this. But after what happened on my porch last week, I need to get this off my chest. The whole situation has been eating at me for years, and now it's reached a breaking point that I never saw coming. When I was 16, my mom made a choice that shattered my world. She had remarried 2 years earlier to a man who came with his own baggage, 2 young kids from his previous marriage. At first, things seemed manageable. We were cramped in our small 3-bedroom house, but I figured we'd make it work somehow. I was naive. The tension started building when my stepfather began complaining about expenses. Every grocery bill, every utility payment, every small expense became a source of arguments. I started hearing hushed conversations through thin walls about how much it cost to feed and clothe 3 kids instead of just his 2. My mom, desperate to keep her new marriage intact, began looking for solutions. The solution she found was me. One evening in March, she sat me down and explained that I was old enough to be independent. She had researched emancipation laws and found a distant relative who would technically take guardianship, so everything would be legal. She presented it like an opportunity, a chance for me to grow up faster, to become the man she knew I could be. But I saw through the carefully chosen words. She was throwing me out to make room for her new family. I spent my last 2 years of high school living in a cramped studio apartment, working 30 hours a week at a local grocery store while maintaining my grades. My mom would call occasionally, always asking how I was doing, never acknowledging what she had done. She'd invite me for holiday dinners where I'd sit awkwardly at the table, watching her dote on my step-siblings while I felt like a visitor in what used to be my family. After graduation, I threw myself into work and education with a fury that surprised everyone around me. I got a full scholarship to a state university, majored in computer science, and spent every free moment either studying or building my skills. While my classmates were partying, I was learning programming languages and building applications. The anger and abandonment I felt became fuel for an ambition I never knew I possessed. By 25, I had landed a senior developer position at a tech startup that exploded in popularity. My equity stake made me wealthy almost overnight when we went public. By 27, I had enough money to buy the house I'd always dreamed of, a beautiful 4-bedroom place in the suburbs with a large front porch and a garden that reminded me of the home I'd lost. That's when my mom started calling more frequently. The conversations always followed the same pattern. She'd ask about my work, express pride in my success, then gradually steer toward her current financial struggles. My step-siblings were now teenagers, both showing promise academically, but college was expensive. She'd mention how hard it was for her and her husband to save money, how they'd sacrificed so much for their kids' futures. I'd listen politely and change the subject. Last month, the calls became more direct. She started asking outright if I could help with college expenses. When I remained non-committal, she began guilting me about family obligations and how successful people should help those less fortunate. She reminded me that she was still my mother, that blood was thicker than water, that I owed her for raising me for 16 years. I told her I'd think about it, but inside, the old anger was burning brighter than ever. Then came the phone call that changed everything. She informed me that she was coming to visit, that she wanted to see my house and discuss the college situation face to face. She said she was bringing my step-siblings so they could meet their successful big brother and maybe I'd feel more connected to them. I agreed, curious to see how this would play out. They arrived on a Saturday afternoon in a beat-up minivan that had seen better days. My mom looked older than I remembered, with gray streaking her hair and worry lines around her eyes. My step-siblings, now 17 and 15, seemed uncomfortable and awkward as they climbed out of the van and stared at my house. We sat on my front porch, drinking lemonade while my mom launched into her prepared speech about family and opportunity and how much it would mean if I could help with college expenses. She had clearly rehearsed this, hitting all the emotional notes about sacrifice and family bonds and the importance of education. The older step-sibling, clearly coached, talked about their dreams of becoming a doctor and how they'd always looked up to me as an example of what hard work could achieve. The younger one mentioned their interest in engineering and how they'd heard I was good with computers. I listened to it all, nodding occasionally, while something cold settled in my chest. Then my mom made her mistake. She started talking about how she'd always known I was special, how she'd made the hard decision to let me become independent because she believed it would make me stronger. She spun my abandonment as some kind of gift she'd given me, a tough love approach that had clearly worked out for the best. She actually said she was proud of how well her parenting strategy had worked. That's when I asked the question that had been burning in my mind for 12 years. I asked her if she remembered the night I came home from work during my senior year and found all my belongings in garbage bags on the front step. I asked if she remembered how I had knocked on the door, confused and scared, only to have her explain through the chain lock that my stepfather had decided there wasn't enough room for everyone. I asked if she remembered how I had begged her not to do this, how I had promised to take up less space, eat less food, cause fewer problems. I asked if she remembered telling me that sometimes parents have to make hard choices and that this was what was best for everyone. The color drained from her face as I spoke. My step-siblings looked confused, clearly hearing this story for the first time. She started to stammer something about how I was misremembering, how it hadn't been like that, how she'd always loved me. But I wasn't finished. I told them about the nights I'd gone to bed hungry because I couldn't afford both rent and groceries. I told them about working double shifts while trying to study for finals. I told them about spending holidays alone in my studio apartment while they were building new family traditions without me. I told them about the scholarship interviews where I'd had to explain my unusual living situation, about the guidance counselor who'd pulled me aside to ask if I was safe at home, about the teacher who'd noticed I was wearing the same clothes multiple days in a row. My mom was crying now, insisting that she'd done what she thought was best, that she'd never meant to hurt me, that she'd always planned to make it up to me somehow. That's when I delivered the final blow. I told her that I'd actually been planning to help with college expenses. I'd been thinking about it for weeks, considering setting up education funds for both kids. Despite everything, they were innocent in this situation, and I believed in the power of education to change lives. But then she'd sat on my porch and tried to rewrite history. She'd tried to take credit for my success while erasing the pain she'd caused. She'd turned my abandonment into some kind of parenting victory. I told her that her visit had reminded me exactly why I'd built my life without her in it. I stood up and walked to my front door, then turned back to face them one last time. I told my step-siblings that I was sorry they'd gotten caught up in this situation, but that their mother had made choices that had consequences. I told them that if they wanted help with college, they should ask the woman who'd chosen them over her own son. I told my mom that she'd gotten exactly what she'd wanted 12 years ago, a family without me in it. And that's exactly what she was going to keep. I went inside and closed the door, listening to the sound of their van starting up and driving away. Update 1. The aftermath hit harder than I expected. For 3 days after they left, I couldn't focus on anything. I kept replaying the conversation, wondering if I'd been too harsh, if I should have handled it differently. The look on my step-siblings' faces haunted me. They'd seemed genuinely shocked by what they'd learned about their mother's past decisions. Then my phone started ringing. First, it was my mom, crying and apologizing, begging me to reconsider. She admitted that she'd made mistakes, but insisted that she'd been young and overwhelmed and trying to hold her marriage together. She said she'd spent years regretting her choices, but hadn't known how to fix things. I didn't answer after the first call. Then came calls from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Apparently, my mom had reached out to everyone in our extended family, painting me as a successful but heartless son who was refusing to help his struggling family. The calls ranged from guilt trips about family loyalty to angry accusations about forgetting where I came from. I blocked most of the numbers. But then something unexpected happened. My 15-year-old step-sibling found me on social media and sent a message that changed my perspective entirely. They apologized for what had happened and said they'd had no idea about my history with their mother. They said they'd always wondered why I was never around for family events and why conversations about me always seemed forced and uncomfortable. But then they told me something that made my blood run cold. They said that over the past year, they'd started noticing their mother treating their older sibling differently. More criticism, less patience, higher expectations coupled with less support. They'd overheard arguments between their parents about college expenses, with their stepfather suggesting that maybe the older kid should consider community college or taking a gap year to work. They were watching history repeat itself. The message ended with a simple request. They asked if I had any advice for someone who might be facing a similar situation to what I'd gone through. I stared at that message for hours, feeling the old anger mix with something I hadn't expected, protective instinct. Update 2. I decided to meet with my step-sibling privately. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop halfway between my city and theirs, without telling their mother. I drove there feeling nervous and unsure, not knowing what to expect from this conversation. They looked older than I remembered from the Porch visit, with worry lines that seemed too mature for a 15-year-old face. We ordered drinks and found a quiet corner booth where we could talk without being overheard. What they told me over the next 2 hours painted a picture that was both familiar and heartbreaking. The financial pressure in their household had been building for months. Their stepfather had been making comments about having too many mouths to feed, about college being a luxury that maybe not everyone could afford. Their mother had been increasingly stressed and short-tempered, especially with the older sibling who was starting to show signs of independence and questioning family decisions. They'd noticed their mother going through the older siblings' belongings, checking their savings account, monitoring their job applications and scholarship essays. There had been talks about the older sibling getting a job and contributing more to household expenses, about maybe taking a year off after graduation to help the family financially. The parallels to my own experience were chilling. But what really got to me was when they asked if I thought they were being paranoid, if they were imagining problems that weren't really there. They'd been gaslighted so effectively that they were doubting their own perceptions of the situation. I told them they weren't imagining anything. I told them to trust their instincts and start preparing for the possibility that they might need to become independent sooner than expected. I gave them practical advice about documentation, savings, scholarship applications, and legal resources for minors in difficult family situations. Then I made them an offer that surprised even me. I told them that if things got bad at home, if they found themselves in a situation similar to what I'd experienced, they could contact me. I couldn't promise to solve all their problems, but I could offer guidance, resources, and if necessary, temporary support while they figured out their next steps. I wasn't doing this for my mother or to repair our relationship. I was doing it because no teenager should have to face what I'd faced alone. They thanked me with tears in their eyes and promised to keep in touch. As I watched them walk back to their bus, I realized that my revenge against my mother had evolved into something more complex, a chance to break a cycle that seemed to be repeating itself. Update 3. 2 weeks later, my phone rang at 11 p.m. on a school night. It was my older step-sibling calling from a friend's house, asking if my offer of help was still open. The situation had exploded exactly as I'd feared it would. Their mother had found out about our coffee shop meeting and had flown into a rage about family loyalty and manipulation. She'd accused me of trying to turn her children against her, of poisoning their minds with lies about the past. The argument had escalated when the older sibling had started asking direct questions about my history and why I'd really left home at 16. In her anger, my mother had revealed more than she'd intended. She'd admitted that yes, she'd made me leave to make room for her new family, but that it had been necessary for everyone's happiness. She'd said that sometimes parents have to choose between their children's comfort and their family survival. Then she'd made the same threat she'd made to me 12 years earlier. If they didn't like the family rules, they were welcome to find somewhere else to live. The older sibling had called her bluff and left. Now they were staying with a friend temporarily, but they needed a more permanent solution. They had 3 months left of high school, college applications pending, and no legal guardian willing to take them in long term. I found myself driving to their town at midnight, my car loaded with legal documents I'd hastily printed and a phone number for a family lawyer who specialized in emancipation cases. We met at an all-night diner where I laid out their options. Emancipation was possible, but complicated. Foster care was an option, but might disrupt their education. Living with relatives was ideal, but required finding relatives willing to take them in. Or there was the option I'd been thinking about during the entire drive. I owned a 4-bedroom house with plenty of space. I had the financial resources to support them through their last months of high school and help them transition to college. I understood exactly what they were going through because I'd lived it myself. I could offer them what no one had offered me, a safe place to land while they built their own future. The conversation that followed was long and complicated. We talked about boundaries, expectations, legal requirements, and the potential impact on their relationship with their mother and younger sibling. We discussed the fact that this arrangement would be temporary, a bridge to help them reach independence, not a permanent family replacement. By sunrise, we'd made a decision that would change both of our lives. 3 days later, I was sitting in a lawyer's office, signing temporary guardianship papers, and setting up a college fund that would ensure my step-sibling could pursue their dreams without the financial stress that had defined my own young adulthood. My mother called me a week later, alternating between fury and desperation. She accused me of stealing her child, of using my money to manipulate the situation, of destroying her family out of spite. I listened to her rant for exactly 60 seconds before I interrupted her. I told her that she was right about one thing. I was using my resources to influence the situation. But I wasn't destroying her family. I was doing what she'd taught me to do 12 years ago, making hard choices about what was best for everyone involved. I told her that her older child was safe, supported, and focused on building a future. They were attending school regularly, maintaining good grades, and working on college applications without the stress of wondering where they'd sleep each night. I told her that if she wanted to rebuild relationships with her children, she needed to start by taking responsibility for the choices she'd made instead of blaming everyone else for the consequences. Then I hung up and blocked her number. My step-sibling graduated with honors 3 months later. I sat in the audience watching them walk across the stage, thinking about the 16-year-old kid who'd sat alone in a studio apartment wondering if anyone would ever be proud of him again. They got into their first choice college with a partial scholarship. The college fund I'd established would cover the rest, ensuring they could focus on their studies instead of working multiple jobs like I'd had to do. At their graduation party, held in my backyard with their friends and the teachers who'd supported them, they gave a speech thanking everyone who'd helped them reach this milestone. When they thanked me, they didn't call me their brother or their guardian or their benefactor. They called me their family. And for the first time in 12 years, I understood what that word was supposed to mean. My revenge against my mother had transformed into something I'd never expected. The chance to be the adult I'd needed when I was young, scared, and alone. The chance to break a cycle of abandonment and show that family isn't just about blood relations or legal obligations. Sometimes family is about choosing to show up for someone when no one else will. Sometimes the best revenge is refusing to become the person who hurt you.